never thought I was going to lose this much money, this fast.
Jim is a Republican who voted for Donald Trump 3 times.
How do you feel about your vote for Donald Trump now?
Well, I feel like perhaps I should have considered some other options.
The past 2 years, Jim has been selling honey to the federal government, which then provides it to schools and food banks. But after Donald Trump took office, the USDA cut those programs suddenly as part of the federal government's effort to streamline spending.
For a lot of other local farmers around here, it was a major source of reliable revenue. For me, it's going to cost me around $150,000 a year.
$150,000?
Yeah, roughly 50% of my revenue.
That's a huge hit.
That's a massive hit.
Back in early March, I talked about how the Trump regime and the USDA cut 2 really important programs that connected America's farmers to America's school children. One was the Local Food for Schools Cooperative Agreement, and the other was the Patrick Leahy Farm to School Grant Program. At that time, I was particularly devastated by these cuts. $1 billion, it's a tiny, tiny drop in the federal budget, but it was significantly impactful in connecting local farmers to hungry children, making sure that people had access to locally grown food. And it was especially heartbreaking for me because so much of my work before all of the nightmare that we're living now was focused around local food chains. How do we support local agriculture? And in what ways do we build more resilient communities by keeping our food chains hyper-local? These programs were really valuable, important programs that supported our farmers and fed our kids, and they were very inexpensive. Supporting very short food chains, reducing costs, connecting producers and consumers that live in close proximity to each other, that makes us more resilient as a society. And to me, at that point in time, I just felt like this is nonsense. Why are they doing this? Most of those farmers around the country who benefited from these 2 programs are Republicans. They were by and large small family farms, but they also by and large voted for Donald Trump. And so I know we were all really into saying, fuck around and find out back then, or you got what you voted for. But the children who ate more richly, who had better nutrition, better access to food because of these programs, none of them voted for Donald Trump. And it's bad for all of our communities when we cut these programs that make society function better, that make everybody more prosperous. So when my mutual hawk said this morning,
but why would you fuck with weather forecasts? I never understood it. I still don't understand it. I have no idea why anyone would do that.
Sorry to play you on double speed, my dude. I'm going to be a little short for time on this video. So I completely understand. It doesn't make sense to those of us that want a functional society, right? When I saw Hawk make that video, now I've talked quite a bit about the nonsensical cuts to NOAA and the National Weather Service and how they are going to harm communities all across this country, particularly red communities, because that is who is in Tornado Alley, and that's who's in hurricane zones, that's who's prone to flooding. That's where we have more poverty and less ability to recover from natural disasters. But as I was watching Hawk talking, like, this doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand it. Please explain to me, like, why is there a war on weather forecasting? Why would they hate weather forecasting? Doesn't make sense. That is precisely how I felt in March when I saw these programs being cut. That farmer that I clipped at the beginning of this video, I believe that video was from late April, and he was one of those farmers benefiting from these very inexpensive, in terms of the federal budget, programs, right? These had a dramatic impact on local agriculture. They were really important. And it, at the time, broke my brain. I couldn't understand why they would be doing these things. It didn't make sense to me. Just like cutting the National Weather Service, it doesn't make sense. But that's because we are looking at this through the lens, the worldview, the mindset of rational people, good people who want a functional society. I think we have to understand there's multiple issues at play here, which makes authoritarians incredibly dangerous. In his piece entitled "Why Autocrats Destroy Their Own Country," Columbia professor Georges Hugeot offers 2 reasons. One is the personality of the autocrat, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, the megalomania, the belief that they can do whatever the fuck they want and they are immune to consequences. Hugeot says that because of their inflated ego, they have convinced themselves that they're capable of overturning basic rules of the economy. They can do whatever they want and the natural economic consequences will not befall them. And I think there is an element there as well that they can just fire all the National Weather Service employees and it won't logically result in more people dying in natural disasters. Yu Zhou says that autocrats are notorious for not listening to bankers, economic advisors, finance ministers. They think that their own ideas about how they're going to fuck with the economy are superior and they will not take advice. I mean, look at Trump's tariffs. Every economist was like, this is a disastrous idea, but Trump has had it in his head for years and years and years that tariffs are wonderful. And we know that megalomaniacs, they are, obsessed, infatuated with their own ideas, and they cannot see any flaw in them, right? So if he thinks his own ideas are great, then they're going to be great, right? It's going to do whatever he wants it to do, regardless of what economic principles and realities actually are. Yu Zhou mentions Erdogan and how his economic leadership resulted in 70% inflation and the destruction of Turkey's economy and its currency. By the end, the Turkish lira had lost 95% of its value. Let that be a warning to Americans. He goes on to say they are deaf to any serious conversation about the future of their countries. They don't care about the future. They don't want to have a conversation or have any advice bestowed upon them. Autocrats believe they know everything. They believe the very laws of nature will bend to their whims. The second factor Yu Zhou talks about, besides their ego, their megalomania, is their ideology. Autocrats develop an ideology around their own belief in their greatness, around their own ego, and that shapes the way that they view the world. And unfortunately, the people who surround them, the pillars of support under and around them, the ideologues who prop them up, they may not have the narcissism and the megalomania, but they have the ideology that springs from it that further supports the autocrat in enacting their terrible, bungling, disastrous plans. He goes on to say the ideology that springs up around autocrats is one where they ignore science, facts, and proof, and they have this kind of nebulous perception of all problems spring from an enemy abroad, or perhaps, I would add, from a minority ethnic group within the country. That ideology also preaches that free thinking and critical thinking are enemies to the regime and they need to be eliminated. So you end up with a kakistocracy where there is a lack of critical thinking. The most inept people, like RFK Jr., are making the decisions because they follow the ideology of the regime and they have no qualifications or skills. I would add there's more to it than that, although I think those are really good points. And from my complete lay perspective here, I would also argue that the chaos that they create, autocrats create, is part of the point, and the cruelty that they inflict is part of the point. If people are more financially insecure because government programs are cut and their businesses are now in jeopardy, then they have to focus intensely on keeping their business going. They have less energy to fight back against the regime. If people are hungry, if people have a lack of access to medical care, if their children are sick, if their children are struggling, if their children are deprived of education, if they don't have childcare, then families have to focus on caring for their children much more. They have to focus on their daily survival and the survival of their children much more. They're less able to fight the regime. In fact, interestingly enough, the number one reason I get in my comments for why people are not able to actively participate in resistance, be it a protest or maybe it's something like a general strike, is because they're afraid of losing their health care. Their situation is so precarious that they know the system is controlling them through their health care. They cannot take any risks that might cost them their health insurance. And so they don't resist, right? It is coercive control. The chaos creates coercive control. It makes all of us much more vulnerable, much more focused on providing for our basic needs and staying alive. It puts us in survival mode, right? If you are now in one of these communities that's in a hurricane zone, in a flood zone, in Tornado Alley, and you have to be on high alert all of the time because there's no longer any weather forecasting. And if there is no FEMA for you afterward, you are now in a position where you are in full survival mode all of the time, and it's harder for you to resist. And likewise, the cruelty is the point. These guys enjoy inflicting suffering. Elon Musk called us all the parasite class. These guys are eugenicists. They don't care if you live or die, and they actually would probably prefer it if you did kick the bucket. If you can't be a useful cog in the machine to make them and the other billionaires money, they would just as soon you suffer and die. Donald Trump made a joke about immigrants being eaten alive by alligators. His acolyte and advisor, Laura Loomer, had a thinly veiled tweet that she would like to see all brown people in this country eaten by alligators. They like to watch us squirm. They like to watch us suffer. And frankly, they are enjoying watching people die. It doesn't make sense to us, but it makes perfect sense to them.